that's why I do what I do, to serve. And I just so happen to serve by helping people realize the best versions of themselves so that when they bump into anything that I do, they go, huh, I never thought about it that way. I'm going to try, boom. And when they do, they have elevated where they are. If that can happen, I have done my job on this earth.
Welcome to the Creative Block. I'm Vince Gonzalez. Today we're here with Dr. Marcus Collins. Dr. Collins is a writer, marketing expert, and cultural translator who has made significant contributions to the field of marketing and academia. Dr. Collins is recognized for his deep understanding of brand strategy, consumer behavior, and the impact of culture on consumption, earning prestigious awards like the Advertising Age's 40 Under 40 and induction into the American Advertising Federation's Advertising Hall of Achievement. His best-selling book, For the Culture, where is it? I got it. For the Culture. Don't be jelly, y'all, but I got mine signed. Mine signed. Explores the influence of culture on consumer behavior, and he is a respected Forbes columnist, trusted voice among business leaders, and devoted family man from Detroit. Marcus, you and I met at USC. You did a panel there. That's how I got your book. You were gracious enough to give out books and did a talk about your whole thesis. Robert Kozinets also was the moderator. I was fortunate enough to meet him and have since interviewed him about his paper on GameStop and ethnography, which was super fascinating. And I just wanted to say that you're obviously very knowledgeable about what you do, but I was really taken aback by what a skilled communicator you are. Like when I was in the audience, I mean, I just felt everybody lean in, and I'm like, wow, that's a fine art. And I really appreciated adding that to, your vast wealth of knowledge.
Oh man, I'm grateful. Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me.
Yeah, it's inspiring. As somebody who creates content, I'm super inspired by it. So imagine this scenario. Imagine I get up, I have my cup of coffee, I take a shower, I check my fade, I put on a custom shirt, I go outside, I step into some all white superstars and, put on some Italian tortoiseshell glasses, protect my eyes. Before I read your book, what I thought I was doing was just self-care, just taking care of myself and feeling good. After your book, I realized I'm putting on a uniform from the tribe that I think I belong to. So, if I see people in arts and media and tech, I could almost walk the street and give the nod up, and we all kind of know what we're talking about. And so that was a really great distinction that you made in the book, because I didn't even know I was really doing that.
Yeah, there is a expected costumery, a silhouette, if you will, an aesthetic of people like us. And whether we're aware of it or not, we adopt that aesthetic such that our identity project is congruent to what we want people to think of us. And the magic trick here, or the magician's trick rather, is that we often aren't even aware of it. Like yourself, we just go, what do you mean? I just dress like this. I like the way it looks on me. Goes, well, why do you think that is? These things are so arbitrary in their value that we negotiated and constructed even when we aren't even aware of it. Just by looking at other people, observing other people. It's, why do you do the things you do? You think it's because of your own agency. Well, the truth of the matter is there's social forces that are just pushed upon you, whether you're aware of them or not. These invisible forces that we adopt or we give into so that we are quote unquote normal based on what normal is for us.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And, and from day one, I mean, most of us don't even realize the influence from a very, very early age. You mentioned in your book, Saturday morning cartoons and, WrestleMania and things like that, that's very young to have those kinds of influences and have, what we perceive as fun and enjoyable and how that affects our working lives.
Indeed. I mean, there's there's just shortcuts to the way we communicate with people and how we connect with people based on this cultural production that we've taken in. If I meet someone, they say thunder, thunder, immediately I go Thundercats, ho, like immediately, like and like without context, much like if you grew up as a kid in the late 2010s or late 2000s, early 2010s, and you heard someone say let it go, in your mind you go let it go, let it go. Like those things, those cultural productions, they become sort of timestamps on where we were in our lives. And depending on what those productions or those products mean to you, you then internalize it in a certain way, and it actually sort of shapes the way that you see the world, which is why I have a certain view on race relations with that before I even started reading the literature on intersectionality and race relations because of Spike Lee movies. I have a certain aesthetic of what is cool, even though right now I'm wearing a cardigan and a polo shirt, which one will feel would be, very collegiate of me. But at the same time, I'm wearing, some Nike 97 Air Maxes, right? Because I think that the hip hop aesthetic is the best version of what is cool because I subscribe my identity to it. These productions, they become frames by which we make meaning of the world and ultimately how we navigate the world as cultural practitioners.
Yeah, I hear you 100%. And I'm a huge fan of 90s hip hop, and so I'll walk around and say things like, I ain't even mad who smashed the E class. And, everybody's looking at me with blank stares. But, I'm laughing inside because I get it.
That's right.
But, but, this generally I'm having conversations about emerging tech and transformative tech. I had to talk to you anyway because your thesis is universal to really any industry, and I thought my audiences would still find it valuable. Uh, Further down in the book, towards the end, you actually talk about Web3 and
Oh
NFTs.
yeah.
So we're having a tech conversation. So it's interesting because we have a lot of texts coming out. Chris Dixon's book on read write own, Amanda's on Web3
Hmm.
marketing. These are books that came across my horizon and kind of are beginning to reframe as I talk about tech, but how tech fits in a world that uh, everyday consumers are soon going to have to adapt to.
Oh yeah. And I think about technology very much through a Marshall McLuhan lens. So
Mm.
I started my career in advertising as a social media marketer. And a lot of my job was saying, in television, you do this, but in social, you do this. In radio, you do this, but in social, you do that, right? Because the technologies were just different. And the way people engage with the technologies were different. And they are, and they were. But what I've come to realize is that the technology does what technology has always done, and that's extend human behavior, right? And the technologies change really, 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 really fast. But people change very, 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 very slowly. And the idea then is that, well, if the tech changes so fast, why do we spend so much time chasing the tech as opposed to understanding the people? Because the people who get the tech
Mm.
right are the people who understand people well. And they build technologies based on the things, the jobs to be done for people. They understand sort of where the points of friction are in people's lives, and they use technology to extend it further. We go, oh, that's so brilliant. Oh, that's so obvious. The
Yeah.
obvious isn't obvious if someone points it out to you. And the
Yeah.
obviousness comes from our proximity to seeing us, seeing people, and understanding the underlying physics of why we do what we do.
Yeah. And Apple's always a great example for that, right? I remember back in the day, I'm old enough to remember when MP3 players first came
Oh,
out.
yeah.
And I think it was Microsoft had something called a Rio. And I remember a coworker had a Rio player and it was a small little thing. And from what I could tell, it had all the same buttons and did the same things, but nobody knows what a Rio is anymore because, the Apple products came out and it became however he did it became the thing that everybody wanted to have and
That's
accessorize.
right.
And that was a great learning experience watching that whole thing
And it was
unfold.
so intuitive. I mean, like Steve Jobs, just brilliant. and the people around him, of course. But
Of course.
like, the design of the product, him sort of eschewing the traditional means by which we would kind of click through our playlist on a Rio, but using the spin wheel instead, that required understanding how people navigate things. Now, that borrowed from Dietrich Rahm from Braun, who had the design
Uh-huh.
already, but he was able to see that. And that's the interesting part about like Apple. Like if you look at like the iPod, the iPhone, you look at the design of Mac. Like a lot of those things were borrowed from pre-existing designs, but they were
Right.
refashioned based on the contemporary behaviors of humanity. Now, I remember just before the iPod came out, maybe 2 years prior, see, it was like 99, 2000, I went to Japan and I got a mini disc player. And
Ooh.
it's before MP3s like really start to even
Yeah.
sort of break through, right? Like people were just now getting MP3s. So I would take my MP3 and then transition it over to this mini disc player. And I was in Japan. I was like, oh, 1000%, this is going to be the thing. It sounds better. You can rewrite and record over it. I was like, this is the thing. Like, CDs are done. This is what's going to be the thing. And I came back to the States and telling everybody about my mini disc player. It's so amazing, so awesome. And like the technology just sort of leapfrog right over mini disc player into the iPod world, which says to me that it's not about the functionality of products alone. Like the functionality only satisfies one job to be done. As Clay Christensen puts it, there's an emotional and a social job that happens too. And when I'm sitting on the MTA on the train in New York and I look down the train and everyone has black earbuds and one person like me has on white earbuds because he too is listening to music through his iPod, I immediately feel connected. And no
Yep.
mini disc player could have ever done that.
Yep. 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 That's crazy. You know, that's the classic Ford comment. If I asked my consumers what they'd want, they'd say faster
That's right.
horse, And so how you wrap your mind around that kind of thinking isn't as easy as it sounds.
No.
You know what I mean? Because we think in incremental improvements, but that's a complete leapfrog mentality on creating content.
Like
It's pretty
what
fascinating.
and it's what's just kind of follow that thread a little bit further and take it back to Apple. So when I worked at Apple, I would hear that quote, that Henry Ford quote that Steve Jobs would refrain. Now I didn't work with Steve Jobs. Don't get me, that was much lower down the totem pole. but
Respect.
but that ethos permeated throughout the organization. And I remember trying to find data points to support my ideas. My manager was like, whatever, just you don't need data points. Like, what is true? And I go, well, do I need
Mm.
like data to support what is true? And it's like, no, what is true is true. And I remember I had like 100-page slide deck with one data point on it, just one. And the work it's got sold in. We actually executed the program that I created, and the program was super successful. And it said to me that this idea of seeing what's on the page before it's written requires an unbelievable level of proximity, just a
Mm.
radical uh, connection with people, this intimacy that allows you to see the world through their lenses before you even have data to represent how they see the world. And that was really powerful.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's inspiring, and that's a lot of work too, right? So that's why not everybody's doing it. You know what I mean? And it takes a lot of emotional intelligence to immerse yourself in a tribe and without an agenda or a bias, and just pull the data from what you're seeing to make a conclusion. I imagine that's just a ton of work that not everybody's
It's a
doing.
ton of work, and it requires exercise. Uh, it requires sharpening the skill. It's a practice, you know. I did my doctoral work using ethnographies
Yeah.
made by our friend Rob Kazanets. So I'm a huge fan. And Rob told me when I was doing my dissertation what John Sherry told him is that when you are doing ethnographic work, you are the research instrument.
Mm.
Like just like if you're doing qualitative work or quantitative work, the regression is the research instrument, right? I get all this data, then I use a regression to tell me if I should accept or reject the null based on the p-value. But when we're doing qualitative research, ethnographies and ethnographies, we are doing the interpreting, we are doing the translating. Therefore, we have to get really good at doing that. It's a
Mm-hmm.
muscle that we sharpen over time. The more we do it, the better we get. The challenge, though, is that the more we do it, the more confident we become, and then the more biases start to creep in. So we have to be
Mm.
constantly sort of checking our biases. It's never 100%, but we can get better at walking in, as grounded theory says, walking into a scenario open minded but not empty headed.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I had a follow up question to that towards the end, but this is a better segue because we're already on this point. So, I have a thing, I have IP, I'm creating media, uh, and my goal with most people that create content is to have honest connections with people and build a wider
Mm-hmm.
audience. If I was going to put a cheat sheet up on my desktop to look up every day, what would be sort of my homework if I was going to pay attention to having honest connection with people with what's in my
Mm.
hand?
I,
Or is that too
no,
simplified?
no, no. I don't think it's an oversimplification. I think it's actually a good sort of shorthand to have. I think the first thing you ask yourself is why am I doing it? I
Mm,
mean, what is this in service of? And some would think of this first to say this, oh, this is in service of your brand, your business,
hmm.
your consultancy, your whatever the case may be. And I go, well, yeah, I would say that's a byproduct, like that's a benefit. But what is
Yeah.
it in service of? That is, why are you doing it? And that why transcends sort of what you're doing, but who are you serving? So and why are you serving them? So when I think about the content I make, I go, well, I want people to realize the best versions of themselves. And I can help them do that through the world that I have occupied and experienced and whatever expertise I might have. So I'm going to share it freely. I'm going to share what's in here with as many people as possible so they can leverage that to make better decisions. So I know why I'm doing it to help people, to serve. Then I go, okay, well, who am I trying to help?
Mm,
Who am I serving? And that informs the kind of content I will end up creating and sharing, right? So
hmm.
if I'm serving other entrepreneurs, I go, okay, so what are the pain points that entrepreneurs have? What are their points of friction? And how might what's in here, what I've experienced, how might that help subvert a problem that they're trying to solve or reduce a barrier that's created some friction for them? And then I go, okay, cool. What's the best way to do that? That could be easily digestible and perhaps worthy of them sharing with other people like themselves.
Mm.
And I think that's what I try to go through like fluidly when I'm making things. But if I were to write it on the board on my wall and operationalize it, that would be the things I think about.
I love that. It's super helpful. And that first part always stressed me out because I didn't really know the answer.
Yeah.
Like, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
That's a big question. It's like, how much time on the therapy couch do you have? It's like one of those things. But what I started with was there was something that I had to desire to experience or just create for myself.
Mm.
And that was the beginning of a thread that I could begin to pull, and then maybe the wider answer would come from that. But that's kind of that for me. That was a tough question, because I was like, I don't know, I like doing it, but that's a little too simplistic, I
And
think.
I certainly didn't get there just out of nowhere.
Hmm.
I got there to that idea of why am I doing it. First, I would say catalyzed by Simon Sinek's "Start with Why." Honestly,
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
like,
great,
"Huh, that's an
great
interesting
content.
frame," and I would
Yeah,
use that for brands, but never for myself.
right.
Use it for brands like, "Oh, does it help the brand connect with people?" Great, and that was
Yeah.
awesome. But when I started to do more than just work as an advertiser, when I started to teach, and I started to give talks and things like that. Even when I started to write. When I was living in New York, people would say, "Oh, what do you do?" because that's what everyone New Yorkers do. What do you do? What do you do?
LA
And
too.
I
Yeah.
would just do like a whole laundry list of things. Well, I'm a professor, and I'm in advertising, and I could feel their eyes just rolling in the back of their heads, like, oh my goodness gracious! I want a quick answer, and I
Yeah.
realized just how uninspiring that seemed when I'd run that laundry list of what I did. And then it dawned on me, it's like, well, why aren't you like taking your own advice? The things you tell your clients, why aren't you doing that for yourself? And to your point, I had to ask myself, well, why do I exist? Like, well, how do I see the world? I didn't have a really good answer. I really didn't. It was very superficial at first. So it was something along the lines of, I want to do cool things. I want dopeness. I want to put dope things in the world. Okay, well, why? I go, oh man, goodness gracious. Because I think that dope things can inspire other people. Okay, so why is that important? Oh man, come on, Marcus. Like you be kind of hard on yourself. And when I asked why a couple more times, sort of borrowing from the ethos of Toyota, asking why 5 times, I sort of got down to like the bottom, like scraping the bottom, and it was the most vulnerable I thought I had been in my life to that point. And it's like, well, what do you really believe about the world? Forget marketing, forget writing, forget speaking, forget business. What do you believe? They go, wow, huh. Well, I believe that we're all put on this earth to serve God and serve each other. That's just what I believe. In fact, if you pressed me, I would say that we serve God by the way that we serve each other. Just what I believe. And I go, okay, so that's why I do what I do, to serve. And I just so happen to serve by helping people realize the best versions of themselves so that when they bump into anything that I do, they go, huh, I never thought about it that way. I'm going to try, boom. And when they do, they have elevated where they are. If that can happen, I have done my job on this earth.
It's I 100% agree. And you know, you're an educator. I work in education. We uh, see in real time the effects of honestly serving uh, in many times in very small
Oh,
ways,
yeah.
like in very small conversations. You know, I can see the person aside from me on the other listening have a shift, and that's pretty incredible. It's a rare beautiful
It's
moment, you know.
such, it is a dopamine hit
Mm,
of intrinsic
for
value.
sure.
When I'm teaching and I can see someone's face scrunched up, like, I don't get it. And I make one example when they go, huh. And I can see their face just sort of release. They go, light bulb, like you see the lights turn on their eyes. And
Yeah.
they sort of lean in just a little bit more. And then before long, they're actually asking questions or contributing or providing another analogy that helps other people in the classroom. And I almost feel like Robin Williams and Dead Poet Society in those moments, like my captain, my captain. I feel like it was standing on their desk, figuratively.
Yeah.
And that for me, I mean, when those moments happen, and I wish they happened more often, truthfully. I mean, I wish everyone was on top of their desks at the end of my sentence. I wish. But when those moments happen, I just feel like I've done something meaningful.
Yeah. And you know, because you're good at what you do and because you care, you're making an observation of people maybe not understanding. And so you're going the extra mile to help them reach that delta and get there. So hats off to you because, you know, I don't know how well of an educator you are, but watching you speak, I'm going to guess you're very good at it. There's page 11 and page 15. If you want people to get to move, there's no vehicle more powerful or more influential than culture. Full stop. This is pretty much the book, right? I mean, in a nutshell, in a sentence, and on page 15, you say this is not a marketing book, it's a people book. I mean, those two things together, you know, you're just filling in details about, you know, how to and the whys, but really that's the core of it. Is that safe to say?
1,000,000%. That is the core argument of the book, that there's no external force more influential to human behavior than culture, full stop. And those who understand that fact will be empowered to influence behavior. And those who do not will be more inclined to be influenced by those who do.
Yeah. You mentioned tailpipe sucking at one point, and I thought that was a great analogy. Because most of us, I think, are tasting fumes. Page 35, Seinfeld. Now, I grew up. I'm old enough to remember when Seinfeld came out. Uh, historically, it was called a show about nothing, and your observation of it rang a bell in my head. A show about nothing. It was a show about social consequences and the results when these norms are violated. I never thought about it in those terms, but as soon as I read that, I'm like, duh. And that's incredible because, I just listened to everybody to describe it as a show about nothing. And I'm like, yeah, it's a show about nothing. It's funny. I laugh, whatever. But that's super, super well observed.
Thank you. I mean, it's a show about everything.
Everything.
It's everything, and I say that not in a hyperbolic way, but like all of our daily living is constructed based on these norms that we have negotiated. Like I say in the book, don't double dip and don't use the bathroom when you're taking a shower. All these things, right? Like, don't live in the building with your ex-girlfriend. Like all of these things, they are all just rules and norms that form daily living. And when you watch the show and you laugh, you are essentially acknowledging those norms. But if you watch the show and you go, I don't get it, then you probably don't get it. you probably
It's not.
are not abiding by the cultural norms, or the cultural
Yeah.
norms
It's
don't really fit for you.
Yeah. It's not. I don't have friends that didn't get it. So, um, yeah, it's interesting, and I would watch that play out in real time because we'd watch the show on Thursday night, and then everybody's repeating the jokes the next
That's
day.
right.
So I was, watching it happen, at the cocktail hour and things like that. So that was pretty fantastic to see that actually happen and become so iconic. Larry David just finished his final episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, putting a bow tie on it with Jerry Seinfeld. It's very, very fantastic. Super, super fan of that whole enterprise.
Thursday evening programming, primetime programming, was the apex of cultural production for that very reason, that the majority of the country were watching something. And you'd go to work. For me, I went to school, and you
Yeah.
would quote sort of the highlights of the show before there were social networking platforms. We know them. We just knew what the memes were before they were memes. And you go to school and you say the thing, and everyone go, "I know, right? I know." The process of doing that were ways by which we were fortifying community.
Yeah.
And social networking platforms today, they just extend what was already human behavior. The same things we
Yeah.
do, plucking out the things that are mimetic, that are representative of a broader social a social commentary on something that's happening in daily living, and then you say it. For me, it was Martin. It was
Yeah.
In Living Color. It
Oh yeah.
was the Cosby Show, Living
Yeah.
Single. Like these shows, they were expressions of people like me. And when I would say words or phrases from the show, it let me know that you were one of us, just like hip hop. Right? If
Yeah.
someone said industry rule number 4080, and then someone goes, "Rubber Company people are shady," you go, "That's right. Tribe. We must be of the same tribe."
That's right. When I was super young, I grew up watching Sanford and
Oh
Son.
yeah.
And so, I grew up in a neighborhood that was not too unlike that scenario.
Huh.
So even though that wasn't my direct experience, I would never say it was. I knew all of those people. They were familiar. So, when he's talking about walking around, talking about not wanting to throw anything away and things like that, it's like,
I
I
know that.
understand, I'm looking outside. That's happening right now.
What's wild is I watched those shows. They were filmed in the 70s. I
Yeah.
watched the reruns in the 80s, and it felt like it was happening right then and there. which is it's so wild how time horizons are are so arbitrary. I
Yeah.
mean, like they were literally a decade old. It's almost like, interestingly, my daughter is 9 years old, and she watches Full House, like Full
Oh,
House
cool.
from the '90s. She watches Full
Yeah.
House from the '90s and loves it. I mean, she cracks up
That's
at
awesome.
all the jokes. She'll go, "Dad, cut it out." I'm like, "Okay, Josh." It's wild. I mean, and you, if we when we take that as a snapshot of creators who have taken their lived experiences and have captured them in an intangible, um, an intangible art form that we call television, music, movies, and the like. This is the same thing that creators do on TikTok, what brands do in their marketing communications when they communicate them, and people go, yes, connections happen, regardless of age, race, gender, geography, household income, and the like, which is why demographics is just a terrible way to talk about people. Because
Yeah.
you can see the cultural production and see yourself in it and go, oh, that's the thing right there. That is just it's fascinating. And this is why I love studying culture. It's the only thing
Yeah.
that I study. It's the only thing that I write about. I mean, everything is a nail and culture is the hammer because culture is in everything. And as a result, it is everything.
I was thinking also why this is even so important. Like, why I was thinking about why do we care about our tribe so much? Why is it that important? But it is a foundational thread that runs through everything, right? And I would imagine that if we were living, with saber-toothed tigers outside and we weren't all polarized on the same thing, that somebody's going to get eaten or threaten to, threaten the cave dwelling or something like that. I imagine that's where that comes from because it seems like universally, globally, we're all very concerned about fitting into our tribe.
Our brain, the job of our brain is to keep us alive.
Yeah.
That's the job. The brain's primary function is to keep you alive. So it makes sure the system, the plumbing is working, all the things are happening, that you're responding the way you ought to respond to stay alive. And the brain does that by making predictions based on what has happened. Based on what things you've experienced, your brain goes, you did that before, don't do that again because you're going to burn yourself. You did that before and you got punched in the face, don't do that again. And we're able to take in tons of information, whether we are aware of it or not, through our social observations to get understanding of what people like us ought to do. And we know intuitively, instinctively, that there is power in numbers. And I like the way you say, this were sub-Saharan African days, and there are saber-toothed tigers going to kill us. We know intuitively that if we're by ourselves, it's a wrap. It's a wrap. But if we were in a group of people, we might have a chance to survive. And when you look at sort of like National Geographic films where you see predators chasing their prey, the predators, they look for the one by themselves, the one skimping in the back, the one who doesn't seem to be a part of the pack. That's easy picking. We
Yeah.
know this intuitively.
Yeah.
That's why if we're in a group of people and someone starts running, we gonna run too. We don't even know why we're running, but we're gonna run
Yeah.
because that
Yeah.
social learning says to us, if they're running, something must be afoul, and for us to stay protected, we ought to run, and we'll figure it out once we get there. That is social proof at its best, at its finest.
Yeah.
So this idea of being in a tribe, being connected, being in a group, to us means survival, and therefore we are constantly exerting like tons of cognitive and physical effort to stay connected. There's a neuroscientist named Matthew Lieberman who talks about a part of the brain called the DACC. And
Hmm.
what he postulates is that part of the brain, it's most active when we're in our most dormant state, like when we're sleeping.
Mm.
And he says that part of the brain is basically rehearsing all of our social interactions
Mm.
so that we can get better at it because socialization means survival. You know, we are we are products of our people. It's just this one story that says that there's the village and the hermit. There's the village and the hermit. And the village decides to pick up and go to another village, another location. So the hermit moves also. Well, why is that? Because the hermit is only a hermit relative to his position to the village.
Yeah.
Everything is all interconnected. Like we are social animals by nature, as Aristotle says. So we do everything we can to be connected. And those connections help us carve out and demarcate the place that we occupy in the world that we call identity. And this is just, it's just fascinating.
Fascinating. Fascinating. I agree. Um, so you educated me on something. I don't know how I missed this, but you were talking about Dr. Dre and Beats.
Mm.
And you were talking about the video that he put out, Do You Love Me?
Hmm.
And I hadn't seen it before. Um, and it was, I don't even know how to put this in words. It has such an impact because it verbalized in a way that I didn't really understand how people on both sides were feeling it. You
Hmm.
know what I mean?
Hmm.
You're talking about Kim Kardashian with the cornrows,
Hmm.
and things like that gap in between, and it's such a powerful. Here's what made me think of it. That music video spoke clearly to a culture, unfiltered. I could just see it being perceived
Hmm.
and just truth being received. I had the same feeling when I watched This Is America because I had a lot of friends that were my age with my hair color. Like, why is his shirt off? What's going on with this guy? Like, the comments were really kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
But I knew watching it that that is a true story that was given completely unfiltered and really just unbelievable storytelling. So thank you for turning me on to that because
Man,
I completely missed
the
that.
social commentary in both of those pieces of work, both that cultural production, is just unbelievable. When we dig into interrogate the Beats by Dre work, it really is a standalone piece. At a time where the discourse was very high, lots of think pieces being written, lots of commentary happening post the execution of George Floyd, the public execution of George Floyd. And Beats by Dre were able to just articulate what was in the conscience of the people, but they never had the words to say it. And when they did, they go, yes, that. You love my culture, but do you love me? Exactly. Meaning the 1,500 word pieces that were written in the Atlantic and that were pontificated through talking heads on MSNBC, all of those things, they all added great fodder to the discourse. But that language, that piece of work, that became the way by which people were able to express themselves in words that hadn't been said yet. And I saw that work not because of the trades, not because it was
Right.
ran on television, never ran on television. I saw that
No.
work because it was flooding my news feed because people like me were like this. And that literally that was the caption. This exclamation mark. All caps. This. And when I saw it, I was like, "Oh yes, yes, this." And even when we think about "This Is America," the song, like the commentary there was capturing the the conflict, the conflicting ethos around the glorification of consumerism, of violence, of guns, while also uh, battling with the fact that these things are just undermining sort of what we call civility. And
Right.
use the words, "This is America," that became a refrain that people would use that language to describe crazy things, that were describe conflicting things, complicated things in the country, And the caption would be, "This is America." That is an unbelievable shorthand. The lesson to be learned from both of those examples is that if you want to engage with culture, if you want to lead culture, you contribute to it in those fashions. You contribute to it with the kind of production that people can use to not only express themselves, but also reflect themselves. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for. To help to help help cultural actors like ourselves do that and do that
Yeah.
more abundantly.
Yeah. It's crazy. You know, I grew up in LA. I came of age when Gates was the police chief here. And, you know, that was a very
Hmm.
militarized kind of environment at the height of cocaine, at the height of the, you know, gang wars. And you mentioned Rodney King in your book. And it's funny because it was, I could see because of mobile devices that became a national and global conversation.
Hmm.
But in my family, we're like, well, we've seen that before.
Yeah.
I've seen it in real time before.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it wasn't new to me.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the technology created a new conversation out of it. And I don't know how far we've advanced since then, but uh, it was interesting to watch that progression and how media sort of changed that conversation. I don't know for the better, but it changed it.
It definitely created um, the stage for us to do some self examination. Unfortunately, that self examination was short lived,
Hmm.
like most things tend to be. But it
Yeah.
was a moment in time where time sort of stood still and we said, whoa. And the public discourse became one of negotiating. Well, what does this mean? Comedians jumping in on it, saying jokes about it, but those jokes were really underpinnings of a greater question or a greater provocation. And today's technology creates more opportunities for us to capture those moments and have more of that discourse. The the Sisyphus challenge of that, however, is that more of that content creates more conversations, but the conversations are only so short lived because there's so much of it. The media
Yeah.
window is so fast, and all of
Yeah.
these things, to some degree or another, deserve our attention and our contribution to the conversation. Right? It deserves some rhetoric, but we don't have the time to give it its just due, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's crazy. Um, well, let me close with this. You start with Jay Z, you end with Jay Z. I do this for my culture. I had a lot of great other verses written from his song that I will not say out loud here because there might be kids watching. But great song, great video, and I've seen that video. I knew of that song. Your observation of it really helped me tie it together. His why,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so and the effects of it are still lasting. And you know, he's built his life and thesis are really around that. It feels honestly like that's what he's been doing
Oh yes.
always. So uh, music, religion, these are great vehicles inside your thesis that allow you to explain kind of your motivations and how these things work, because these are really two things that everybody's super familiar with, and everybody understands the byproducts and the process and how we got there. And I would imagine that's very intentional on your part.
Indeed, when I started to write the book, I thought to myself, what can I contribute to the canon that hasn't already been said?
Mm,
People who have treaded these paths are titans in my field of study in consumer culture theory, particularly from a sociological lens, from Durkheim all the way to Rob Kozinets. I mean, you know, these guys are just giants. And when
yeah.
I thought about how I might contribute something novel, unique, helpful, I said, what can I bring that's uniquely me that might help other people see this in ways that the pre-existing text does not, or cannot, or does not. And I thought to myself, well, those early cats, the sociology, Weber and Durkheim, even Marx, they looked at culture through religion. Religion. They studied culture by observing religion. I go, well, I'm a church boy. I could do that. And I grew up a hip hop kid. I go, well, that's another layer to add on top of that. And I've practiced. I've actually done the things. And the early starts of my career were mostly intuitive. And the latter part became far more informed by the theory. And I go, oh, well, I can use the layering of those three things to provide a unique point of view here. I would believe, at the very least, to provide an articulation that someone who didn't, get their doctorate or someone didn't grow up reading the literature or reading the scholarly works can say, oh, I get that, and could actually start using it. That was the hope. And I figured if I wrote it through that lens, then I could at least be vulnerable enough that people could see the humanity in it. At least that was the hope.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well said. Anybody, please, anybody watching this, get this damn book. If you are lucky enough to see this man speak, please get in front of him. It is a treat. And Marcus, I am very, very, very grateful for your time. We swung at this a couple of times. I'm super grateful that we got it to happen. And if there's anything I can do and help your cause, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I just really, really wish you and yours the very best.
That means the world to me. Thank you so much for having me. This was worth the wait.